Guys, sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, there we are. Okay, here we go.
You're right on time.
Oh, you're perfect. Okay, hear you. Good deal. Thank you all for taking the time. Let's do a quick roll call as we convene this special.
I lost hearing you somehow. I
Yeah,
can't hear you
me
over
too,
Zoom.
Mara, you and I
Oh,
are both
yeah,
hearing lots of video, audio.
Okay, let's clear that up.
There we go.
Hello.
I hear you now.
Okay, are you here?
I am.
Hey, never know about these deep fake videos. All right, Mr. Platt here, Mr. Fine,
Here.
and Hinkley is here. We have a full roster. So again, first, thank you all. This is sort of P&Z Gluttony Day. Appreciate the extra effort to hit all these meetings, but I hope they're a good purpose. So let me start with just laying the setting for what I'm which may be a very short meeting, if possible. How we got here? Quickly, 2007, the city and the county undertook a cap update. 2008, upon presentation of that work by the consultant, the county rejected that cap and started its own, along with a revision of the aquifer regs. 2011, that process was complete. The county planning and zoning sent a new set of certified to this board of county commissioners, a new set of regs, and those regs were basically rejected in favor of a set of regs that one of the commissioners himself had come up with, and they proceeded to endorse those without further involvement by planning and zoning, which should sound somewhat familiar. 2019 and 20, planning and zoning took up new regs. In my opinion, without a great deal of enthusiasm. It kind of dragged on there over the 2 years, and there were lots of drafts and public meetings, and finally had a couple of work sessions with the Board of County Commissioners. Come 2021 in February, this board of planning and zoning certified what they had to Board of County Commissioners. And by that point, I was on the planning and zoning, joining Mr. Kennedy, and then Ms. Hanning was there at that point. It seemed to me that the sense of it was they were sick and tired of it. It was clear that the board wasn't completely on board with them, so it was basically, hey, board, take it and do what you want to with it, which is exactly what happened over the course of 21. The board heavily modified the planning and zoning version and put those drafts out for review, took files of public comments, held their public hearings, and in November of 21, the board adopted a revised set of aquifer regulations. So kind of informally, I'm calling those the 2021s. The very next month, 2 lawsuits were filed challenging the new regulations on a whole variety of issues, one of which was that that substantive modifications had been made to what the board received from planning and zoning, and that should have gone back through P&Z. Okay. Life goes on. Here a couple weeks ago, we finally got a judgment on that lawsuit. And the judge ruled that the 2021 aquifer regulations were adopted contrary to state statute. So we're back to what I'm going to call the 2011 version as the ones that are currently in effect. If anybody wants to correct any of that, I think that's the basics of it. And the judge also ruled that the county was out of line to have changed the boundary without first changing the process for moving the boundary. So there's a kind of a 1-2 subtlety there, but it makes a certain amount of sense that you, and that was the accusation in the lawsuit, you have to follow your own rules to change the boundary until you've changed your own rules. So let's get the cart out and behind the horse instead of in front. So what we're here today to consider is amendments to the 2011 APOZ regulations and putting the proposed amended regulations out for the statutory 30-day public review, comment, and schedule a public hearing. Absent substantive changes through that process, P&Z could then certify the amendments to the board, and they could start their own public comment and hearing process, which council tells us that would be another 45 days. This would hit all the bases that the judges determined that the state statute requires, and the 2021 regulations as amended through our process, and the board procedures would become the rules going forward. So the proposition before us is to as quickly as possible, efficiently as possible, get that train back up on the tracks. This is just me opining, so that we can turn our attention to things like the growth area management plan and the update of the cap, which will also have regulations flowing therefrom. What was concluded with this meeting are the current regulations, what I'm calling the 2011s, with red line strikeout to show the amendments that were adopted by the board in 2021, plus a couple of small adjustments that Mr. Harris has recommended to us to change the map reference and to clear the way for subsequent revisions of the existing boundary. So approval of the draft regulations, of course, today does not include any boundary change. But the map associated with the proposal before us today would include the boundary as it was drawn in 2002, give or take, but are otherwise those adopted by the full board in 2021. Okay. So a couple of key points. The regulations that the board approved in 2021 were the result of 3 years of massaging and public input. They're not perfect, nothing ever is, but they were, I think, a credible and workable reflection of the community's desires as expressed through their elected representatives. They were good to go last year. They're good to go now, in the opinion of the board. We may not agree. I do. Okay, that said, we're under no obligation to accept these regs just because the board did accept it in 2021. We are welcome to do whatever we like. If we put these out for public review and hearing now, we have that 30-day opportunity to make changes to them. If we make a substantive change, then we've got to go back around again. And I think we'd all agree that in good faith, we shouldn't put them out for public hearing unless we're pleased with them, absent maybe some tinkering. So we do want to move them forward ingenuously. But there will be opportunities to change, and there will be public comment, and there will be a second public comment. With that all that in mind, I'd like to give this short special meeting pretty tight focus by conducting our discussion within a motion to put the APOZ amendments distributed for this meeting, including Mr. Ayers' recommended amendments, out for public review and set a hearing date. I think the most orderly process would be to do that in 2 pieces. Let's decide if we want to send them out for public comment. If we do, then let's set a hearing date. We will need to accomplish both of those things to move forward from this meeting. So if you're in agreement with that approach to begin our discussion, I would entertain a motion to put the APOZ amendments as distributed for this meeting out for public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Hanning will second.
Thank you. Okay. So let us discuss that motion. Anybody?
I would like to hear from Matt where the changes were that he made.
And perhaps we could bring those up on the screen. Who's got the screen? Let's see. Where did Regulation.
You want mine? I have them.
You've got more folders than I do.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I've been hard to beat my organization. I got regulations on here. Shoot, that's not that one.
The ones that Matt sent? Is that what we're looking
Yes,
at?
yes,
Yeah.
the ones that were distributed for this meeting. That is,
Okay.
that's what's
See, there you go.
in the motion.
That's not gonna narrow down much.
If
I emailed you a lot.
We do email.
it's logged off, could we take the screen? Okay, there it is.
It should have been the second one, right? This
Yeah,
is-
second one.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, I've got them.
All right. Now let's see if I can,
What you're looking for is on page 3 at the bottom. Middle, down right.
Okay.
How far down? No, I think you go back up. This is on page 3, it's sort of close to the.
New 5A, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. New 5A.
Yeah.
There we go. So the changes that I made in this document are alternatively appearing mostly in red text. However, there is one green, which denotes just a movement of text. So initially, we had it defined as the APOZ boundary is defined on page 1.9 of the Albany County zoning map book. Just in terms of clarification and also to allow for future change while still being coherent and consistent. That was just changed to the APOZ boundaries defined and depicted in the official Albany County zoning maps, which also ties in the approach that we have taken with the zoning district amendment process and how we have sort of defined and treated the official Albany County zoning maps through that process. Directly below that change was just where the boundary divides a lot. The requirements shall apply only to that portion that the lot is located within the APOZ. That was just conceptually quite an outlier. So I moved that down.
Just on about 2 pages, but you moved it verbatim.
Moved it verbatim to basically kind of the regulatory and spatial provisions of the APOZ regulations. And then below that B, that is added language, which was put in response to Judge Westby's ruling in the APOZ appeals. Essentially, what my office came to the conclusion with is that given our zoning district amendment process, which the commissioners will be considering for final adoption next Tuesday, December 6th, that is also a process which would define how a boundary of a zoning district is to be done. The APOZ boundary is not, I suppose, procedurally or conceptually the same kind of boundary as an individual parcel zoning designation. So to make it clear, I provided that the APOZ boundary is to be amended based upon the cabinet's updates and is otherwise provided by these APOZ regulations. The provision directly below that for exclusions is such of those otherwise provided regulations, because of course an exclusion would result in amendment to the APOZ boundary. And then just defining that the APOZ regulations are to be done in a normal or in the typical statutory process as we would be following for these and have followed for others. And then further, just clearly stating that the zoning district amendment provisions and procedures of section 5 of this chapter are inapplicable to APOZ boundary amendments.
And then from exclusions down all that blue, that's was
That-
adopted last year.
Mhm. And then
I think you're only on where
if you could go down to 6, dude. Yeah, up
just
just
a hair, you'll see where you put that other back in.
yes. So that is the kind of split lot regulation provision. Made a lot more sense being with those other provisions than where it was. And then lastly, part just procedurally, because these regulations are not in effect, we did have a little bit of language cleanup in our zoning district amendments, where we changed zoning change to zoning district amendment within these regulations. But since these are no longer effective, those provisions of the amendments, which will be before the commissioners, are also no longer effective. So moving down to page is, the first one is on page 11. That's just from the, oh, yeah, I don't know what's happened there. Interesting. Some kind of formatting.
Okay.
It's under SSI provisions, so, oh, then go up.
Is that what this is on the side?
Yeah, so there's the first one, which obviously in the PDF you've received.
Is it a much different place?
They go different ways.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing this.
But that's, yeah, all of this stuff.
Because you aren't using exactly the same version of Word. Probably.
Yeah.
And then there are two more of those, I guess, amendments from zoning district change to zoning district amendment on page 16 under exemptions to SSI requirements. And that is the entirety of the changes that I've proposed. Certainly the first, I suppose, the first change for the APOZ boundary amendments that would be legally necessary to the enactment of, I guess, these provisions and any sort of change going forward. Otherwise, we would have to, I guess, abide by the zoning district amendment provisions for each individual property therein, which is not statutory requirement, but the language that we put in is broad enough where it could put us back in the same position we are now.
So basically that would free us to move the boundary in response to all this research that static's doing, for example.
Correct.
So we'll go on and look at all the well logs and try to find out where the boundary is. Okay. Questions for Mr. Harris? Further discussion of the motion?
Just one question, just for clarification again, the ruling that we received was solely about basically how this was done. There wasn't anything that disagreed or struck down any provision that we were trying to enact, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
I just want to point out one area that our office has an issue with, in what was proposed previously. Let me see if I can find it. It's under the wastewater design. Okay, so here it says, under 10A, in addition to design standards listed in the Albany County small wastewater regulations, all new and replacement septic systems located with the APOZ shall meet Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality standards for septics in the same aquifer that supplies the public water supply well. I just want to point out that this is from a footnote in chapter 25, which is the septic regulations for DEQ. Where our office has the issue is, one, the purpose of this is not well defined on what we're asking for. We're just saying, look at what it says here. And now staff, as well as the county attorney's office, has to look at DEQ standards and try to figure out what they're saying. We're looking at it, and I feel like this is not good policy to be looking at another agency's regulations to try to determine what they're saying and then apply it to our regulations. So that's one of the problems I have with this. The other problem is this regulation basically says that if you're in a area that's designated, or that if septic systems are being put in an aquifer that serves public water supply, like ours does, then they have to provide additional treatment, which is not defined by the state. It also says that, and it should keep it below certain levels of nitrates, like it has to be, so septic in this area or additional treatment should bring it down to below 10 milligrams per liter in this area, and there's some other standard in there.
Do you have an amendment to propose here?
Well, I would, yeah, so I would propose that we remove this and get rid of this standard. That would be one of the options, and just go back to the 2011 version. Or that if the purpose of this being in here is to require additional treatment units, that we put an amendment in there that requires an additional treatment unit. So we know exactly why this is in here. Because staff can't really determine that from what it says in there, because we're looking at somebody else's regulations that don't make sense to us. In addition, their regulations there, they are based on what they get from a chapter 23 report. If the chapter 23 report for a subdivision says they need, there's less, or there's more than 10 milligrams per liter, then we have to go ahead and apply these new standards. That's when this chapter 25, section applies, according to the DEQ, from what I understand. So there's a lot of moving parts here. I just wanted to say what it should say, what we want it to say. I mean, if we want additional treatment units, whatever, let's put that in there. But if not, let's take this out. That would be my recommendation.
All right. Well,
And that's obviously for your discussion, and
all right, that's, we have a motion on the floor that does not include that. So unless there is an amendment to that motion that is articulable, you're recommending we vote no on the motion on the floor and work this all out at some point. Is that where you're headed? I mean, that's what's before us. Is a yes or no vote on the amendment on the floor?
yes, I mean, I'd like to see this changed, but I mean, that's my recommendation.
Okay, is to not move these as they stand.
Yes, or if you just want to remove and replacement, I'd be happy with that too, because that's problematic. We can still, I mean, it doesn't take care of the root problem, but that's
For the
another
purpose of
issue.
discussion, if we remove this one, bearing in mind that we are currently working on redoing this again, I don't see any reason to complicate it by leaving that in there.
So do you have an amendment to offer to our
I
motion?
would move to remove A from this version.
And would that satisfy your concern, Mr. Gertz?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
I would second that.
Is there discussion of that motion? We're amending the amendment, but that's standard procedure. Further discussion?
Question,
Yes, Mr. Stein.
Mr. Chair. Am I to understand that the county's regulations are significantly different than DEQ?
This is a point of contention that is not going to get solved this afternoon, I will guarantee you.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that as a yes, and that's all I needed.
Are we ready for a vote on the amendment offered by Mr. Kennedy? Mr. Kennedy, how about you? Ms. Annie?
Oh, I can't decide.
We can come back. Mr.
Thanks.
Stein,
Aye.
Ms. Platt,
Aye.
Hinckley, no. Ms. Hanning,
No.
okay, 3-2, the motion passes. We have now got, we're back to the main motion, which is to approve the amendments as distributed, including advice from council and the recently added amendment from Mr. Kennedy. Is there further discussion of that motion? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote. Mr. Kennedy,
Aye.
Ms. Hanning,
Aye.
Mr. Stein,
Aye.
Ms. Platt,
Aye.
Hinckley votes aye. Motion passes. Second thing on our agenda is to set a date for that special meeting. It can be no sooner than 30 days from Mr. Gertsch. How quickly do we move forward?
So I will need to,
Matt looks like he wants to say something.
No.
No, okay.
I just pensively awaiting Mr. Oswald's response.
let me do the
Let's finish the material that's on the floor. Well, I guess, he's looking, go ahead. We have a public comment from Mrs. Starkey,
Just a question,
please.
number 3 on your agenda for this particular meeting says adjourn the work session. Is this the work session?
We're looking at the right meeting.
Yes,
Yes, I am.
One section was combined in the agenda that was issued.
No, this is specific to this.
Yes.
Meeting, and it says adjourn work session.
What's the notice say at the top?
Special meeting,
All right.
APOZ.
Okay, I would judge
Oh,
that,
well-
the title should control. All right, let's,
January 2nd would be
okay,
the quickest.
so, there are various options there would be to hold the public hearing, maybe in combination with their January meeting. It's been suggested that that might not be a good idea. It might be something that requires sufficient time that we would like to set it apart. My preference, as I said, to introduce this whole session is to just get this thing back up on the rails so we can turn our attention elsewhere. What's the pleasure of the group? What do those look like for calendar days? So January 3rd is our first possible meeting date. What day is that?
Tuesday. And I would, as much as I don't like to commute from Cheyenne, I would much prefer, I think the regular meeting date's appropriate,
Which is January
11th.
11th. All right, I'd favor the 3rd or the 4th, yeah, just get this done and not clog up our next meeting. Ms. Platt, what's your thinking on the subject?
I'm neutral in this. I'm happy to do whatever you prefer, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Fanning?
I would be available for the early meeting and the regular meeting.
Mr. Fine?
I would struggle to make the early meeting, but it's possible. And of course, the regular meeting's already scheduled.
And would another date in between those two, 4th, 5th, make any difference?
Yeah, toward the later part of the week, I'm generally more available. But again, you know.
Okay, is there a motion as between the various dates? Sounds like between the 3rd and the 11th. I think we've all made our preferences outlined. Would somebody like to move for a specific date?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we conduct this meeting on the 3rd.
Is there a second?
Hanning will second.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to hold our public hearing, which concludes the 30-day public comment period on January 3rd. Further discussion of that motion?
Yes, you do.
Yes, we do. I would, I guess I would have leave that discretion of staff in terms of availability of facilities and so forth. Would that suit the maker of the motion?
Yes.
Is that acceptable, Mr. Gertsch?
Yeah,
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to have the special meeting on January 3rd at a time to be established by staff in coordination with facility availability. We're clear on the motion. Is there further discussion of that motion? Seeing none. Mr. Kennedy,
Aye.
Ms. Hanning,
Aye.
Ms. Stein,
All right.
Ms. Platt, aye. Hinckley votes aye, and the motion carries. And that concludes the business of this meeting. And we have another one at 3, so I'm happy to take a break. Are there other comments that anyone would like to make before we adjourn this meeting? Seeing none, let's formally adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second to Mr. Kennedy's motion to adjourn?
Well, Hanning will second.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy? How do you vote?
Aye.
Henning?
Aye.
Fine?
Aye.
Platt? Aye. Hinckley? Aye. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. And our next meeting is a special meeting at 3. Correct?
Work session.
That one is the work session. Okay. Thank you for
Which-
being on the right track.
There's no legal distinction between special meeting and work session.
Okay. We noticed it as a work session.
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's
Statutes talk about regular meetings.
An emergency.
Emergency.
what is the emergency?
It has to be like a bona fide.
It has to be a genuine emergency and you have to meet like within 48 hours after
Afterwards,
and
yeah.
approve whatever you did.
It has to be like public health and safety
Yeah.
or imminently.
But it's like on 10 minutes notice or something.
I don't think an emergency
It
meeting
doesn't say you
requires.
don't have
this,
to.
Okay.
But you do have to
You do
hold
have
a public meeting in order to.
Okay.
to ratify.
Right.
It's
yeah.
basically a public executive session,
Yes.
essentially, is the way to look at it.
But you might decline to ratify in that sense.
Where you could have all been wiped off the
You were moving to put out the fire and.
And I forgot to bring my coffee with me, so I'm.
Well, Vern, if you could
I'm gonna
conduct
last
the,
the rest of the
joint
afternoon.
Okay, so I see Maura and Jeff are still with us. We'll wait till 3 if you guys want to take a quick break. A lot. Oh, that's what I assume so.
You don't have to serve page via mail, you can just give it to her.
Yeah, it's already in the mail.
Okay, well, in the future, don't worry about it.
Okay.
I don't know why she's not registered.
Yeah, I thought you.
That's a page bit. Anyway, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Save the.
David, copy. David. Okay, I thought you were. All right, 3 o'clock, are we good to go? This meeting, this special meeting of the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission is called to order. Let's do a quick roll call, make sure everybody's here. Mr. Kennedy,
Here.
Ms. Hanning,
Here,
Mr. Platt,
Here.
Mr. Stein. You still with us, Jeff?
Sorry, here, yeah,
Okay, Hinckley
my
here.
mic turned off.
We're in full force. Just for the record, could we have a quick survey of the audience? Actually, you don't have to declare yourself, but you're welcome to. Would you like to
Sure.
note you're here?
Yeah, Jackie Carswell, WWC Engineering.
Levi Heim with Weston.
I am Megan Getz. I represent the applicant, Howell Estates.
Kimberly Starkey, concerned citizen.
Garrett Howell.
Okay. Thank you. So I assume that Levi, Megan, and Mr. and we have Jared Rudd, I'm sorry, Jared Ralph are here on behalf of Mr. High. But right, okay. So this will be a much less structured meeting than our last one, and it was a suggestion of Mr. Ralph. And Jared, are you with us? Let's make sure.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Back in May, we received the application for the preliminary plat for the Howell Acres subdivision, preliminary plat application SB 1221. And this body approved it with a condition that certain what we considered were errors in the chapter 23 with water wastewater suitability study be addressed. Mr. Ralph rightly noted that the experts that had been retained to provide that analysis weren't there. And rather than trying to communicate something, he said to her, to him, to them, he asked us to put our concerns in writing, which the board, the commission then authorized me to do, and I did that. And that email was delivered to the applicant. I think you reminded us of the dates of that. That was, and anyway, May 20-ish, yes, 20th-ish. And so, okay, something like that. So that sounds about right. I mean, the date isn't critical, except the point was that I wanted to have the record reflect that we did move quickly to respond to Mr. Ralph's request. And those concerns. May 23rd. May 23rd. Okay. Our recommendation went forward to the county commission, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on the representative applicant or on the call, proceeded to move to the final plat, which came before us at our last meeting. And it immediately raised the question, what happened to, was there any response to those conditions with which we approved the preliminary plat. The answer initially was nothing has happened. And I received a call from Mr. Klein that morning saying, first I've seen of this. A short response was developed over the course of the day. Sure, good morning. Oh, walk out, and you'll have to find your chair. The notice didn't include bringing your own chair, but we'll see if we can round one up. Okay, Mr. Wetstein just joined the meeting.
Here, I'll let you sit here and I'll actually come sit over next to Garrett. That'll work out.
Okay, and the easel can be moved. I thought we might want to scribble, so if you want to, we could move the easel out of the way, but yeah, that's fine, whatever works.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize.
I got a little bit.
So to try to characterize what the issue here is that we, Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission, have gotten several subdivision applications accompanied by what I'll call the water wastewater suitability studies that are done under Chapter 23 of the D2 regulations. And we have found what we consider to be inadequacies in those reports, the non-adverse opinion we get from DEQ notwithstanding. So as we discussed at our previous meeting, that left us in this odd ground of DEQ, who are charged with reviewing these water wastewater suitability studies, said looks good to us. It came to us and we said does not look good to us. And we have had communications with the DEQ both as this board planning and zoning, and I can attest previous years as a practicing professional geologist in Wyoming on some of these issues, and nothing conclusive has happened. So the question that Mr. Ralph quite correctly raised is, okay, I've made DEQ happy. What's it going to take to make you guys happy? And I'm not in a position to speculate on regulatory authorities there, but the thought is let's go through those issues and perhaps we can come to some agreement of how this application and others can proceed. And I would also note that at our last meeting, we had another application in the same boat from Mr. Einspar. So we aren't explicitly discussing that one today, but we're hopeful that the discussion will apply to these water wastewater studies in a more general way. The one immediately before us is the one submitted by Mr. Howell. Okay, questions, comments? Anybody want to flesh out that background better? Oh, well, I guess I should also note that at that meeting, when we were saying who should be part of this discussion, we asked ourselves, who in recent months have we received these Chapter 23 studies from? And that led to extending the specific invitation to Mr. Wetstein, who is here. Well, on behalf of EA, under EA's banner, he has written several of these. And Ms. Carswell, who similarly has experience writing these studies in her employment through WWC Engineering. So, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman Hinckley. My name again is Megan Getz. I'm an attorney. I think I've worked with all of you in some capacity or another. I'm coming in late to the game, so I just want to understand. And I talked with Mr. Gertz yesterday, and I just want to confirm that I'm understanding what's happening here today, right? And thank you for that background information. Sorry, I'm going to take off my coat. All these people here. We're all got a lot of hot air too, right? So as I understand it, and please correct me, David or Chairman Hinckley, if I'm wrong. The application that's been submitted for pursuant to staff's review has met all necessary requirements as it relates to the review under Albany County Code at this time. What I understand is happening is there are some questions that relate to the component of wastewater for this particular applicant that you might like to answer or explore today. But then as it relates to how you might like to see studies or reports written in the future is just a general conversation that you're talking about, and whether or not that's in code or required right now is a determination that Mr. Ayers and his folks will need to make later on. I mean, I just want to be clear as to whether or not there's a hypothetical conversation going on about what might be better for your review and reports later on versus what technically is written in code now that the applicant needs to meet, and that criteria needs to be fulfilled. Because as I understand it, no action is being taken today. This is just a discussion, and I really want to be careful that we keep those two issues very separated as far as what the applicant has done under existing code and regulation and what might be a conversation for future applications or code changes.
Yeah, I think you generally got the idea, except for that very first part. I'm not sure that it qualifies as a complete application. And again, just because I'm not the lawyer, but you prefaced all your remarks with that is a given, and I don't know that is a given. So.
Well, when it was presented at the meeting, that is what the staff said, is it complied with all finding of fact and everything else, so.
Okay. And I don't know if our subsequent discussion changes that opinion any, again, I'm not going there. So I don't know the answer to that now, if Mr. Ayers or Mr. Birch would like to opine, but my understanding is that we have an application before us that we were unwilling to approve, and the applicant asked for a work session to help us explore our unwillingness to approve. And yes, very much so. We would like to see if we can find an accommodation of these issues going forward. In that sense, it's quite hypothetical. And so, no, I don't expect any decisions to come out of this meeting beyond direction.
Mr. Chairman, did DEQ decline or just unable to attend, or what is the status there?
Do you have that email at your fingertips? They were, yeah.
All my emails are from.
Oh, wait, that's
No, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've got a November 22 email from Keenan Hendon, who we had communicated with the DQ. I think he sent one this morning, though, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to get
I didn't know that. Long story short, no, they are not attending.
Yeah.
His response was, "We hear you have some issues, and we're working on modifying our review process to accommodate those."
Yeah, I think that was Keith's question, right? About DEQ.
Okay.
Because they had been invited to this meeting.
Yeah. Oh, yes, they've been invited, but I mean, on very short notice, so it would have been wonderful had they provided their technical folks here. Just by way of background, we've had this conversation, me and Z, with the Q related to, well, it was related to the work that Scarswell did for a subdivision called Cocktail Estates. It led to a discussion between me as our chair and Jennifer Zygmunt, who's the water quality administrator, and Keenan had been saying, yeah, there's some issues here, we're working on it. So they hadn't resolved any of those issues at that point. They continue to tell us that they are concerned and they may change their procedures going forward. So I hope that happens, and we wouldn't have to be here because our basic position was that DEQ had not given us sufficient information to move forward. Okay, other plenary questions?
Vern, is the crux of the issue that DEQ is not providing all the analysis that we want, and we're allowed to have a higher standard. We have to meet the minimum standards set by the state. we are allowed to ask additional questions or, gain more information. Is that right or not?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to go to that. That sounds like a legal interpretation. So again, jump in here, Matt. My preference would be we try to keep this discussion technical. I'm maybe ceaselessly optimistic, but I'm hopeful that we can come to an accommodation here at a technical level. And we won't have to have the discussion of you can't make me. Which I think is behind your question, and it's a fair question.
Yeah, and I'll just state for the record, obviously Mr. Howe is here and is willing to be cooperative and engage in this discussion, but that is without waiver of the right and the position that we take, that we've met all of the responsibilities under the code. If there are decisions or questions that want to make changes as it relates to future review and analysis of additional subdivision applications, certainly that's something that we would like to participate in. And if there are questions that we can answer here today, that give you a level of comfortability with what's been presented to you, certainly we're going to cooperate and participate there. But that's, again, we've met the standards that are imposed now as a member of the public who's seeking to subdivide, has fulfilled those responsibilities and obligations. And so there's nothing more to do. I just need to say that as part of why we're here. Glad to continue to engage in the conversation.
We understand that assertion, and it may or may not be true, but you're welcome to make it. That's another discussion for another day. Okay. If we may proceed, again, I'm not without hope that we can resolve this at a technical level, which is why I asked these guys to bring in whiteboard. So let's just go through the issues that we outlined in order kind of how easily they can be disposed of. And we're
Can I
in
ask where those issues were outlined? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh.
Was that from the last meeting minutes or?
that was the May letter that was sent to.
Oh, okay.
The undated letter you're referring to?
I'm not referring to an undated letter. I'm referring to an email that very explicitly had a date at the top, which Mr. Jones has already shared with us. It was May 23. I think he told us. So let's not mischaracterize it. We are in a perhaps unique situation in that we have 3 well-qualified hydrogeologists on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that's how this came to be.
2 of your licensed practice.
So is that right? I haven't looked up people's licenses, but that aside, my point is we have this situation where we have some hydrogeologic expertise on the planning and zoning who are then able to read the work of folks like yourselves and read it critically and qualify it. And if you don't feel that we're adequately stamping our products, you're welcome to point that out. But that was what had to be done in another forum. That's not what's going on today. Let's start with the first issue. We found, okay, the DQ provides a nitrate balance model. They call it the Wyoming model. They call it a model, maybe a little bit glorious. It's basically just a mass balance. You got a bucket, you got a hose running in it, 2 gallons a minute, you got an eyedropper of contaminant, and you do the math and you figure out what the concentration is. That's as simple as that. It's a model where you put your inputs in and generate an output. And then the output has to meet a certain standard to get the checkoff from DEQ. So it's a very simple model, perhaps simplistic, certainly doesn't apply to the extraordinary complexity that we're all familiar with in the natural environment, but we try to make it fit as best we can. One of those inputs, which then determines, okay, so you got a block of material here, and you've got water flowing in from up gradient that dilutes the contamination coming down from the surface. And you got the rain clouds raining down, and they dilute that. And we take those inputs from the contaminant source, we take the inputs from the clouds, we take the input from the groundwater, run the math, see what comes out there. Fair?
Sure. Now you're talking about an unconfined aquifer.
I'm talking about the nitrate balance that you guys all run to make DEQ.
It was developed for an unconfined.
That was developed by DEQ for whatever purposes DEQ wants to apply it to. We'll get to that as well. Now, what we saw in the Howell application specifically, and we continue to see the applications before and since then, is instead of a number for the horizontal hydraulic conductivity, which determines how much water comes into an upgrade, we find that populated with a value extracted from a perk test. We, the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, find that objectionable and scientifically without basis. So let's start with that. If we, again, my hope would be that a template has been inherited from your predecessors that is flawed. In response to a comment that was made by Mr. Himes when we spoke, and you said you'd never been challenged on this, which I found distressing. And by way of background, see, all we get from DEQ is this non-adverse, and they never tell us what their analysis wanted to do. One through a public records request can reach into DEQ and see what's going on in their internal dialogue.
Sure, but
And in some cases, we have done
you should
that.
understand how the process
Just a minute.
works.
And we have found through that process that there have been technical voices in DEQ that objected to the use of perk tests.
My understanding is one, yes.
Okay, you know them all? I mean, what's the basis of saying that's only happened one time?
Well, because I talked to Dennis Lewis, the Southeast District Engineer,
Okay.
extensively the other day.
Okay,
So you're aware of how the process works, and so that we can get this on the record, because I think we're mischaracterizing the review that goes on with Wyoming DEQ.
please.
Wyoming DEQ has 12 professional geologists on staff, and I don't know, in the neighborhood of 100 some engineers on staff. The way these work is when we submit these to Wyoming DEQ, they break apart the Weirman model and they instantly send it over to the PGs to review. The PGs will go through that Weirman model. They will verify that they agree scientifically with the numbers that are put inside of that Weirman model. If they don't agree with some number, either porosity or hydraulic conductivity or whatever number is in there, they will actually modify that model and rerun it to verify that it does not cross the threshold of 10 milligrams per liter, which is the benchmark we've all agreed upon and all set. Now, if it does not cross 10 milligrams per liter, if the model submitted is at 6.3 and they have a problem with the number and it goes to 6.8, they're still going to issue a non-adverse. They will notify the principal engineer who's doing the non-adverse recommendation or adverse recommendation review that they modified the model to address their concern of either porosity, conductivity, whatever the number may be. Then the engineer is aware of it. They will issue a non-adverse or an adverse, depending on what else is in there. They'll ask for comments, feedback, that sort of thing. It's an iterative process. Now, in this case, what has happened is you're mixing, we're not discharging into the same aquifer that we're withdrawing out. So the aquifer is
in the Howell case.
in the Howell case, very specifically in the Howell
But
case.
this is a generic discussion as well, so. Go
Sure,
ahead.
the generic discussion is they will go back and forth. Now, if they modify those model results that we sent, say we pinned 6.2 in the model, they find some error within the model that pushes it over 10, obviously they're going to issue a non-adverse or an adverse, sorry. They will also, per Dennis Lewis in my phone call with him, he said, I'll give you a call and I will let you know that we had a problem with the model. We modified the model and it pushes you over 10. So you're going to have advanced treatment. You're going to have to do something else. We're going to have to modify something and we will issue an adverse recommendation. It's an iterative process. So they don't just blindly rubber stamp things. They don't just close their eyes and hope everything's okay and stamp it. It is an extensive review process. And having gone through it for the last 15 years, it is an extensive review process. Now, whether you want additional information is a different conversation.
Okay, let me ask you this. Have you?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Hunt.
since we have an expert, maybe we could get some insight on why the model's failing.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
The whole point here is the model failed.
Sure,
See,
the model's not
cumulative-
even appropriately to be used in this case, actually, because it's a mass balance. Which means. you
Excuse
have
me,
to draw
excuse
from
me,
the same interval.
excuse me. Hey,
Hold on,
yeah, thank you.
I,
I'd like to finish.
on,
You can
hold
educate.
on, everybody. Last time we did this turned into, words that I'm not even gonna say here. And so I think for purpose of this discussion, I'm happy to share this, but we're gonna go one at a time. And people are gonna address the chair, whether they're a member of the commission, whoever. But I am not gonna go through what we did the last meeting. That was unbecoming of members of the public and members of this board, the way that went back and forth. And I'm not gonna put up with it anymore.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
I would offer to the commission that let us, given my own involvement in this, let us turn the meeting over to our vice chair, Mr. Kennedy. Would that
All right.
satisfy your concern?
Let's roll the clock back.
Okay. all right.
We were here with you, and then we'll go next to you. Member time.
Mr. Chairman, so on that same topic, some of the comments that were made at the last meeting about me personally, when I don't know any of you, I've never submitted something in front of you, real troubling. To the fact of Mr. Jeffrey saying that I should find a different line of work and that my my engineer should find a different geologist, those things are real troubling. And those things could be actionable. So it just doesn't need to go that way. We can have a professional, honest conversation. I don't know any of you. I've talked to Bern a few times, but I don't know any of you. This doesn't need to be adversarial. We can disagree and we can still come to some sort of resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sympathetic to that.
And Mr. Tyne, now continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair. I may be misunderstanding the purpose of this meeting. What I gathered from the last meeting is that we continue to get no adverse impact from the Werman model. When clearly what we're watching in the data is the nitrate levels climb. And at some point very soon in Albany County, we will not be able to have development because the Werman model will say no. So there's a couple possibilities. One is the Werman model is not appropriate for some of the uses, some of the problems we're having. So my question was respectful in, since we have somebody who's very knowledgeable about how it's been applied and how it's done, can you give us any insight into why we're potentially failing? For instance, an inappropriate model, the parameters in the model are not correctly parameterized, we're not considering cumulative effects. How do we maintain the ability to continue to expand occupancy in Albany County with septic systems? That's not the question I want to answer. I want the expert opinion of where's the model not working here? Where's the tool inadequate? That's my question.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
With all due respect to Mr. Stein, I had intended that this meeting answer a much narrower question than that, which was how the nitrate model has been implemented in these particular cases. I would grant that we have been concerned about things like cumulative impact, and we've heard back from DEQ in response to queries from Chairman Gosar that they are not at this point addressing cumulative impacts. We all agree they should be. I don't think that that's relevant to our treatment of Mr. Howell. Those are larger issues that we should address somewhere else. I have some questions for Mr. Himes based on his earlier representation of the process. Okay. May I proceed with those?
Certainly.
Okay, my question is going to be, over these 15 years and many, many studies, have you had them, you represent is that they will call you if your number is too high. Have they called you if their number is different than yours, but it's still under 10? That's the space I'm interested in.
I have received conversations and we have had iterative back and forth. They will send us a request for us to either, if it's a model or if there's some other sort of typo or something like that, they do send you a request for information. You will respond to that request and they won't move it forward until they are satisfied with your answer.
And is it your understanding that were they to look at your inputs and find them flawed in some way, and then they would do their own inputs and run their own numbers, and if they came out with, say, 6, whereas you had a 4, would they call you, or would they just say, looks, I don't mean to say it's casually, would they then say, we find no adverse?
Mr. Chairman, it has varied based on the reviewer. Some reviewers will reach out and say, we modified your model and this is how we modified it. Some of the district engineers will do that, not all of them. This is part of the thing that we struggle with different DEQ offices around the state, is they all kind of have a different way to look at whatever we submit, whether it's a permit to construct, whether it's whatever the case may be. They all kind of conduct their own review and they all kind of use their own interpretation of the statute, which is how this has always been done. And I think that's been, if you've worked around the entire state, that has been people's argument with different offices is one guy is going to ask you for all sorts of different things, and one guy may not ask you for that same thing, but he may ask you for a whole different suite of things. So DEQ, and they are aware of this as well, does have an issue internally, which I don't know how you govern that many people to try and have everyone carbon copy exactly the same way of reviewing. It's engineers and geologists all have a different approach. Part of it's science, part of it's art. So,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, have you had any discussion with DEQ on this specific point of use of a perk test to assign the hydraulic, that has horizontal hydraulic connectivity?
I have not personally. Now, I cannot say that Ben Jordan or someone else from our office has not. I don't know. I haven't talked to Ben about it. Now, go ahead.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
do you, as a practicing hydrogeologist licensed in the state of Wyoming, assert that one can adequately characterize horizontal hydraulic conductivity in an aquifer by using the perk test?
Are we discussing this particular case or generally?
In general?
I do not practice that way, no. Now, it has been done and can be done if you were discharging into the same aquifer and it's an actual aquifer. The problem we have at Howell is it's not an aquifer. There's 51 feet of shale underlying that 10 foot of quaternary sediment that in the aquifer is confined. So in this specific case, use of a perk test to characterize the media which is receiving waste, I think is completely adequate. That wastewater is never going to see the aquifer. The aquifer is confined, which violates the inputs of the model, actually.
Oh, Mr. Chair, okay. And I'm sympathetic to much of what you're saying, particularly your recitation of DEQ and one's relationship with them. And one of the problems that we have had, that we have expressed to DEQ, is what we as regulators see is non-adverse. And I hesitate to say never, because that covers quite a territory.
Right.
Let's call never. Do we see any? We found these issues with the analysis that was rendered to us, and we corrected them, and we still thought it was now non-adverse. And we have asked them, the word I used is, what we see is non-adverse attach what we see as a problematic analysis.
Sure.
And we are left unable to distinguish between give it a pass, we know these guys, it's cool, versus we looked at it very carefully, we corrected errors, and we still came up with that solution.
Sure.
So that is a issue with DEQ. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And they, likewise, they don't provide you the 15-page letter that I sent them based on whatever comments they returned. They don't provide you that either. You see the non-adverse. So that is part of between the Planning and Zoning Commission and DEQ that I can't govern and can't control.
Well, no, that provides us a potential exit from this discussion. You could provide those to us. You're not
Right.
forbidden to do that, and perhaps until DEQ sorts out its review processes and establishes some consistency across the state. I mean, like you and others in this room, we all experience this, and it's frustrating. DEQ personnel changes and you get a different answer than you did talk to. That's an issue. So we are, in this essence, engaged in trying to set DEQ over here for the moment and sidetrack that. So if you could provide to us that kind of an exchange,
They
that
didn't
might
provide
be
any comments on this.
Okay, they didn't.
No. On this particular study, they didn't ask. Now I can verify this with Ben. Maybe they requested something of Ben that I was not privy to. There is nothing in the file that they requested. Now I can ask them if they requested something from him and in what capacity he addressed those. But as far as this is the other part of the hiccup is the email was sent originally to Ben. Ben left our office in July, which is no one's fault. Things just got missed, which is where then Jared circled back around to us and said, hey, I never got a response, which is where we cranked out the letter to you the day of the meeting, which I know was not favorable for anyone's timescale. So I can circle back around to Ben. I wouldn't want to speak for him, but as far as I am aware, there was no request for additional information on this particular subdivision study.
Mr. Chair, the subject,
Yes.
the point of my question was, we don't need to answer that. But the obvious invitation would be for you to provide that information.
In the future, sure, yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
and on this, I mean, that would satisfy potentially the conditions with which we applied.
Sure.
If you were to have come forward back in May or can come forward at this point and satisfy those concerns as a hydrogeologist. So DEQ has not been helpful, but we have these concerns and we've expressed them in the letter. And if you were to respond to those in a credible scientific way, maybe we'd be done.
Which we did. But
Third, Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
okay.
through you to Bern. So in essence, what you would kind of like, I've always just addressed these to DEQ and left it up to DEQ to pass it along to the appropriate county reviewers. So in Albany County, you would like to see us submit to DEQ and then you as well as kind of a primary, just to start the review process, and then any follow-up documents that go back and forth, or even from you guys. Can you clarify this so that you would then have all of the information as DEQ would, and you could probably then discuss their review comments a little bit more intelligently.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. And this was a point that Mr. Bauch made. And I would invite everyone to look at the county website. They have there's a set of subdivision regulations that we forwarded to them last month that address this issue. And if you have some comments on that, and they are exactly to your point, Mr. Wetstein, as Mr. Ralph put it, this whole discussion is quite like what the applicant typically has with Jake Schneider, our county engineer, and they work out all those details. Mr. Schneider doesn't have the expertise to provide that level of review. So we do have a problem here. This all should have happened before the application came to us. the world did not provide that opportunity. But, and we're making that opportunity, and I think I can speak for planning and zoning sake, we are not interested as a long-term solution in replacing DEQ. It just happens that we have the expertise right now to do this, but we would love to have it taken care of at a more structural level. That's what has to happen over the long haul. So yes, that should happen. And this is kind of what we're doing today, like the conversations that Mr. Ralph would have with county and county staff. It's absolutely right.
I have a question for Matt. And so is this a gentleman's agreement, or is this something that would have to be codified? Because I don't see any basis for rejecting something that isn't within our regulations.
Well, under our regulations, we require essentially the chapter 23 report as part of the application. DEQ is the statutorily charged reviewing body, but what they provide is a recommendation. Explicitly under statute, the county can act contrary to that recommendation. So it would.
And the reason I asked that was because I had read through the delegation agreement earlier. So that was something that had popped into my mind when I looked through the delegation agreement, was where were the county's limits on what it can and cannot do based on that delegation agreement.
The county certainly cannot replace DEQ as the sole reviewing agency. But just like anything, ultimately the county, through planning and zoning's recommendation and the Board of County Commissioners, are the ultimate approving body of a subdivision permit. Part of that is the chapter 23 report and the studies pertaining to wastewater and groundwater. And that can't exist in a vacuum where DEQ is the only entity involved. Otherwise, I mean, it would be some sort of permit issuing from them and not the county ultimately.
Well, but there's a difference between domestic wastewater systems, which are governed by the agreement, versus an entire subdivision study. I mean, because the county does permit domestic septic systems, but the county doesn't have authority to review chapter 23 rules or chapter 23 studies based on statute. It's not been outlined in the delegation agreement, I don't believe.
No, that is true. But it has the authority to disregard and act contrary to Wyoming DEQ. So
absolutely,
I suppose without a level of review from the county, how would that contrary action be possible? And ultimately, it's part of the subdivision application, which is required under statute and our regulations.
So question from a logistics standpoint is currently sits on this committee 2 licensed professional geologists. Now, lots of terms expire in January. So is it then going to become a requirement that in order to sit on this committee that you're a licensed professional geologist? Or are we going to add staff to review these? I mean,
go ahead.
My preference would be we bring this back to the science. We can have a legal argument somewhere else. My hope was that, as I say, we could satisfy these geologists wherever they come from and however they're going to last. So if the applicant whatever it is, were to provide planning and zoning justification, explanation for the parameters you used to do the groundwater impact study for the house subdivision, that potentially would satisfy us, and we would not have to reach to the legalities of who has to do what. Now, if it comes to that, then it comes to that. And we'll have that discussion. So let me just quickly review. And as I say, let us look forward. This is Mr. Howell's issue, but Mr. Einspar is in the same boat, where the aquifers and ponds is characterized here. From a science point of view, if one's going to provide a dilution calculation, the gradient, the input nitrate concentration, and the permeability all have to come from the same thing. What we have found in these is we have, and I'll address this in Scarswell, and we had this discussion. There's a perk test in a gravel that's 3 feet deep gives you a number, but where the septic effluent is going is into a sandy shale that has a very different permeability, and that's the one in which the wells are located, from which one derives a gradient. That's just a complete mismatch, and those numbers make no sense. So as I think I put it at our last meeting, I am unwilling as a member of planning and zoning to approve a report that contains what I see are just fundamental scientific flaws. And if the argument is the whole model is inappropriate, then let's hear that argument rather than trying to shoehorn some number that we pulled out of wherever to make the matrix work forward. I'm guessing that you have the same frustration.
I think you actually perfectly addressed my hangup with trying to provide you a hydraulic conductivity to a confined aquifer to run a model. That waste is never going to see that aquifer. It's got 25 pounds of pressure on it. Here's the as-built diagram for the well that was constructed in the subdivision. So my issue is I'm not willing to provide you a hydraulic conductivity for a well in a confined aquifer where the waste is never going to go. The waste is not going to get into that aquifer based on the principles of it being confined. So if I go through and provide you a hydraulic conductivity, then I've done exactly what you just said I shouldn't do, and I have cherry picked a number from a zone that's lower when I'm discharging waste within this upper 10 feet, which is where I characterized the media, or Ben, but he characterized the media that was receiving the waste. Then there's this giant chunk of shale. First water was arrived at 60 feet. And then the water level in the well is 1 foot below ground. So it's obviously very confined. So the model, and here's another email. That's from John Pichelle at Wyoming DEQ. John Pichelle is the one who designed the spreadsheets that we all use. So he did not make the Wehrman model, but he is the one that has spent more time with that model than anyone in the state of Wyoming. I discussed Howell with him specifically. I explained the situation. I explained what we were thinking, what you were thinking. And he said, when he was in charge of the groundwater section, which he is not any longer, but he said, I would have actually sent that back to you and told you to put in your text that you should not run this model because it violates the statute or the parameters of the model. Therefore, you should have put in your report, the aquifer is confined, the waste will never see that, and that's it. Done.
Go ahead. Good idea.
Yeah.
So, but again, for a moment, we put our hat on. What we see is a nitrate balance model that is misparameterized. You would grant that?
I disagree that it's misparameterized, but what we used in that to run the nitrate balance, by the fact that it's confined, it violates the model to start with. We were also we're starting to tread into this weird middle ground where if I don't do a perk test and provide that data to Wyoming DEQ, they will reject my subdivision application saying that we didn't do that correctly. You're asking me to do the opposite of them. So now do you want me to do 2 subdivision studies? One with one set of numbers for you, one with one set of numbers for DEQ.
Mr. Chair, what we would like you to do is the subdivision wastewater impact study that you represent as being scientifically credible. Now, we've set the DEQ aside. I think we're communicating on. I guess I can only speak specifically for myself, but I think we've had this discussion across the board. We are unwilling to approve an analysis that we perceive to be blatantly misparameterized. Now, what I hear you saying is, I had no choice, they made me. That's between you and these two. What we would like to see is an appropriately parameterized model where each of those inputs is either justified or a coherent scientifically based argument that the model is appropriate, as Mr. Bushell has offered you. That would be great.
See, and my assumption was that you guys would not like it if we didn't run the model. So that's fine. I'm happy to send you an email saying the model is violated based on the fact that the aquifer is confined, that the waste is never going to see that aquifer. The mass balance is erroneously used to begin with, because in order to have the balance, you have to withdraw from the same interval you're discharging into, which can't happen in this case. So, because there is no water in that upper portion above that shale. So I can happily send that back to you if you'd like. Now, I feel like we did address that in the comments that we sent back to you, saying that the well is confined based on the water level and the base of the aquitard.
Okay, let's peel the onion back one layer.
Sure.
Now, granted, this well, this is the Wilhelm number one.
Yep. Which is right in the subdivision.
Right in the subdivision. It's completed, I believe you told us in your diagram, that in the Pharrell and Sugar. This well taps a confined aquifer, as you have argued. Okay, so
that's first fly water. Yep.
Now, well, let's follow that for a second. You have given us 3 wells with which you determined the gradient.
Sure.
And you picked 3 wells, not including this one, that were completed in the shallowest water bearing zone.
Sure.
So I think it's inappropriate to say the aquifer. We get this in Casper all the time. Where is the effluent going? Is the question we're asking ourselves at times, right? And nowhere is a suspect kind of answer. It's going someplace.
Yeah.
Now, are the 3 wells that you used to characterize your gradient completed in similarly confined aquifers? That is a question that should be answered.
I'll have to go back and look.
Okay, and I'm looking at one of those where they ran a short pump test. That's a better source for a permeability.
What kind of pump test was that?
They ran a pump test. It's with typically in the cursory report that drillers provide to the state engineer's office with a picture well.
Go to drawdown.
Okay, a very cursory pump test. It's nothing.
You said cursory, that was what I did. Yeah, I saw your, yeah.
It's a 1-point pump test.
Watson typically does a 2-hour pump test. That's his thing. So we'll pump it for 2 hours and give you the amount of drawdown within the well. And from that, you can calculate specific capacity, which then you can change to transmissivity, which then you can change to hydraulic conductivity. So
yeah, when I do those, I go straight to the Tice equation and look at the diameter of the well. You don't have to go through the 1,500 times the specific capacity. All right, I'm looking at the Ballard well, which is one of the ones you use to characterize the gradient. 20 feet deep, static water levels 8 feet. There's no log. That doesn't on its face look like a confined aquifer. And it has a test associated with it. Now, again, I'm not trying to do your report for you, but it strikes me as a hydrogeologist that if I'm given 3 wells completed in the first water bearing unit, and I extract from them a permeability and a gradient, now we're talking.
well, yeah, so I can go back and look at the confinement of those wells and the construction of them.
The other well you used was the Terry number 1. Now it's 40 feet deep, 3 foot static. That's looks a little more like something that's confined, and it's open to the Pharrell limestone as well. But I think from a science point of view, we would all understand that in terms of the receiving aquifer, the receiving unit, if you resist the word aquifer, for the effluent, is that shallowest one.
Right now,
Which
that's
is
still going to be under that shale that's present there. So we can go back and we can look at that.
But within that shale, I mean, the characterization of shale as this rubber sheet is incorrect. There's an awful lot of wells out there that are developed quite successfully in fractured shales.
Yeah, it's fractured here.
which speaks to another point that we took issue with, which was the use, and this is a template I understand you're following, of characterizing the reported completion interval as the water bearing zone. That's not appropriate. As we noted in our comments, every well out there is completed well below if it's completed responsibly, well below the water table. So to say that this well receives its water from 50 to 60 feet, static is 30, therefore it's confined aquifer, you characterize every aquifer in the state as confined.
Well, except for the definition of the confined aquifers, the water level rises above the base of the aquitard. So in this case, there is no way that you can make the argument that it is not confined. With a water level of 1 foot below ground, with the aquitard being down that far, there's 25 pounds of pressure on that formation. There's no way you can make the argument it's not confined, which is what we said in our response back to your comment number 1 is it is clearly very confined. And John made the same argument at Spotted Horse a half a mile southeast. So it is confined, and we demonstrated that in our comment back. And I made this as-built diagram the other day to just further elaborate the fact that it is confined. I mean,
Okay, the chair, so you're asking us to respond not to the report that we were delivering, but to the short piece you produced that afternoon. Because again, when we go back to what we see, sure, we see confinement, what I would call mischaracterized. We see a mismatch in parameterization of the model, and that makes us uncomfortable, and in my case, unwilling to approve of it.
sure, which is where we have this iterative process with DEQ. If they have something like that, or like your email that you sent, they will send us something asking for additional information, which is what you did. So then we responded to you with a letter. Now, the way this typically works, at least with DEQ, and obviously this is a new system that the county is working out, is then the ball is in your court in order to respond to our letter that we sent you. If you still don't find that letter sufficient, I would like you to provide me evidence and documentation as to why my response to your comments didn't rise to the level of what you want. And then I will happily go back and I will give you another set of comments to address your concerns. But this shooting in the dark of well, and at the last meeting, multiple people said that the report was insufficient. Well, as you referenced, the way the county engineer works is he's going to draw a bubble around something and say, this is a problem. So I would love to see an iterative process, mark up my report and send it back to me, which is essentially what you did with your comments, and we responded back to those. So then where do we sit now as far as the letter that we sent back to you guys? Okay, we need to do another round, or?
Okay,
That dialogue took place over 6 months.
Right, yeah, no, I know, I'm catching up fast too.
Okay, so yes, what you described is exactly right, and I would repeat my observation. It's unfortunate because that is we can do that because of the expertise we have on planning and zoning. We need a structural solution to this. That's outside the how. But let us reach with one step further into the Einspar, where we had the same issues. And so, and I guess this is the question I would have for you and Mr. Ralph, or Mr. Howells. How would you like to proceed with that one in that similar iterative process? Because your response on how was not relevant to the Einspar.
Sure.
We're trying to find a generic solution here to all of these.
And what Jared had asked at the meeting was if comments could be please provided so that we can see in writing what you're asking for and address those. So that we understand where you guys are coming from, and then we can address those comments.
And would you like to, I mean, we know what that letter would look like. It's gonna be virtually identical. How would you like to see that letter, or are you willing? Okay, rather than going forward from this meeting as having had that direction.
I want something in writing because it's much easier for me to respond to something in writing versus me trying to interpret what you're saying and someone else is saying and all of us being confused. I think it's easier to have something in writing for me to go bullet point by bullet point and explain our thinking, and so we can try and get to some resolution on that one, which is a completely different thing.
I'd like to hear from the other engineers before we move on from right here. Any thoughts?
You're in this discussion, Vern. Eli, it seems like you're combining section 7 and section 8 of chapter 23. Section 7 pertains strictly to the first water, like you say, Vern, the receiving water.
Yep.
And so your argument of this is a confined aquifer only pertains if that is the first water that is out there. If there is shallower water, even though wells are not completed in it, that's the one you address in section 7. And that's the one that you have to apply the Bierman model to figure out the gradient. And a lot of times that's excused with nobody uses this water, or you do get a water sample from that and say it's not suitable for livestock.
Right.
But which in this case, it sounded like you're saying there was a shallower water and you're applying the deeper water parameters to that, and you disagree. Is that kind of where you're?
Go ahead.
No, not exactly. I'm simply pointing out that we can't mix things up.
Yeah.
So this does not characterize the water bearing unit that we're interested in, because this well does not characterize the water bearing unit that's going to receive septic effluent. That's something shallower.
There's no other
And
water
that's what
there.
you're saying. There's a shallower
So
water.
there's a shallower, yes, and
Yeah.
we call it an aquifer, and that's difficult. And the idea that, well, nobody's using it, and that ricochets back through DEQ. That's not an entirely satisfactory answer, because if I am contaminating a unit that nobody is using now, well, are they then requiring any further well drilling in the area to avoid that
but
unit?
that goes, no, I maybe misspoke, but that it goes to the water quality. Is this a, class 1, 2 aquifer? And for chapter 23, if it's I forget the classes, but if it's a class 3, then you do not have to worry about exceeding 10 milligrams per liter.
Right.
Tell me that. That's excellent. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So that I'm just saying that it sounds like you, as the planning commission, were asking Levi/Weston to address that. You applied this to your deep aquifer. We would like you to address the shallow aquifer impacts.
Or argue that it's just all inappropriate. And I'll offer the larger discussion to bring Jackie into it. In that case, it's up by 9 Mile. The receiving strata for the septic tank effluent has a TDS of like 1800 or something. It's horrible. It's just horrible. I don't think we would have any trouble saying we are not going to deny you your subdivision because your septics are going to increase the nitrate levels in this completely rotten aquifer. And we practically begged DEQ to consider that and give us a non-adverse based on water quality, which would have been a far more satisfying response from DEQ than them saying blank, no adverse. So I think what all of these, whether it's Cottontail or Pine Spar or Powell, we are looking for something that we as planning and zoning commissioners can accept as a scientifically credible statement about what's going on under the subdivision.
So my question then becomes, at this location, first water was at 60 feet, which is below that shale. So there was no water encountered prior to that 60 feet.
And so the other wells that you brought forward are not,
Outside of the subdivision boundary. Now I can go back and look and see exactly where they're at, but within the subdivision, which is where that well is drilled, right in the middle of the subdivision, the very first water that they hit was at 60 feet, which is below the shale and below the aquifer. So there isn't anything to characterize as an aquifer above that. There is no water there. So the very first water that they hit within that subdivision is the water that was characterized. I mean, that's the well that was sampled with the water quality. So then we had our base nitrate, those sorts of things. So my problem is if we're gonna try and figure out that strata above the aquifer that has no water in it, how can that also then begins to violate the 2-year time of travel and stuff, because that waste is going to go down. It just doesn't magically float out horizontally. It is going to go primarily down. And so, I mean, there is no water above where this well, I guess it's a little above where the screen arrow is, but that first water is characterized at 60 feet. So how would you like me to tackle that when there is no water in that section of well?
well, sure. The first thing I'd like to see is the wells that it seems to me, correctly sought out wells that were completed in the shallow zones.
Right.
And if those are just across the line from the subdivision, then let us take all the data that are available to us to do this characterization. So again, I don't know that pinning your stratigraphy to this and well, and Mr. Watson's observation to get the water at 80 feet or whatever it was, that's certainly okay. That's inconsistent with the well I just quoted for you that you brought to our attention, the Ballard well, where their whole well is only closed.
Yeah, he drilled it with air. So
okay, so that's
I mean, he's gonna know, as we all, if you've been on the back of a rig, you know when you hit water.
Here's the 20-foot wells.
Yeah,
It was successful.
I'll have to look at where that's at and how it's completed.
May I ask you a question? Certainly, Vern, if those other wells didn't exist, how would this analysis have failed or not failed? I mean, it seems if the other, we didn't know about those other wells, it seems like what Levi is saying would be correct. Is that right or not?
I think the challenge to those of us who do these is you gather all available data and make your best hydrogeologic analysis. Now, there are some folks in our profession that insist on a carefully constructed well on the piece. I'm thinking of Mr. Dahlgren, for example, over in Laramie County. Good idea. Now, we're not in a position to require that of you, although we might consider that going forward as some change in regulations. I'm not going there now, but at a minimum, I don't think it's unreasonable for us to require of our applicants at a technical level to gather all available data and give us your credible, best analysis. So if one finds themselves in a situation where they simply don't know, then there should be a program for coming to know. And in some cases, maybe that requires drilling.
Well, but my question is because
Go ahead.
in the well we're talking about, it was dry until you hit the confined aquifer.
Yep.
But there are nearby wells where it's not dry. So I'm just saying, if those other wells didn't exist, would the analysis have been correct? I mean, what more could he have done?
In an ideal world, it would be great if I could require every single landowner to go out and drill a suite of wells surrounding their subdivision to first water so that I can sample nitrate. We can see what's coming into the subdivision, what's going out. Unfortunately, it's not practical.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're doing a scientific experiment, that's awesome. If we're doing a practical experiment, we have to rise to the level of rules and regulations and make sure that we're meeting standards. So,
Yeah, I don't have a crisp answer.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn something here.
yeah, it would be great if we could just require everybody to go out and drill 3 or 4 wells in and around each subdivision, but you know, I don't think that's ever gonna happen. Nobody has that kind of money, I mean, is what it comes down to. And I don't think DEQ would probably think that that is necessary. I don't know, that would be a question for them as to what they want.
Well, it would depend on the hydrogeologic situation. Sure. I mean, to say I'm blind, therefore give me the permit, that's not acceptable. So one has to meet some threshold level of sight to have a credible, a scientifically credible representation. And that's what this board felt it had not received at this point. Now, in fairness, we have not had opportunity to digest your response, and I would just suggest that a response generated within 2 hours of a phone call, or perhaps you would like to expand on that, maybe not, maybe you feel like you said everything there was to say. You're a quicker writer than I am, if that's the case.
I think I should be congratulated for a 2-hour turnaround. I dropped everything else for that.
Would you like the opportunity to respond more fully?
Well, I can send you more information, but honestly, what is provided in your bullet points there was addressed in point 1. We made the argument that it was confined. Now in section 2, you know, we can go back and forth about that because we have been for an hour. Let's see, so, as directed by Wyoming DEQ, the empirical inputs taken from percolation tests are used to characterize.
What are you reading from? Just well on board.
This letter that was sent to you guys. So this is,
Your letter of the day of our meeting.
yep, this is the letter that we sent you the day of the meeting. So percolation tests should be used in order to characterize that receiving media. So again, we're back into that conversation of aquifer, not an aquifer. In this case, because there was no water, DEQ wanted us to characterize that receiving media that was going to receive that waste. So that is what we did. So that was done according to the statement of completion referenced above, which is this well that I did the as-built for. There's 50 feet of shale underlying that 10 foot of quaternary sediments that are sitting at the top. So we've got that 50 foot of shale there that obviously has low permeability, as we all know from shales, because it's not fractured at this location. So the leachate water from that leach field it will travel vertically more than it will horizontally, because there's no aquifer there, no water to transport that waste horizontally. So, you know, that was addressed. The 2-year time of travel we addressed on there as well. Essentially going through and recharacterizing that there is no water present above that 60 foot interval. So there isn't anything, I mean, the 2-year time of travel is essentially meaningless. And that is what we said in there. And then we did go through and address the cumulative nitrate and reference the letter that Jennifer had sent to Pete Gosar saying that Wyoming DEQ does not require that. And my conversations with Dennis Lewis is, you know, they have no ability under rule and regulation to require us to do a cumulative nitrate model, which, as we've all discussed, and particularly in some areas of the state, they need to address that. But it isn't there for us to address. There is no governance for me to do a cumulative nitrate model. I mean, you know, how far afoot do we go? You know, a mile, 5 miles? Do we, you know, what do we include? What do we not include? Those are conversations for a bigger topic, and not holding this thing up because of a cumulative nitrate. So I do feel like we responded sufficiently to your comments. Now, whether you agree with those or not, you can absolutely send me back what you think. And I'm happy to answer more questions.
On that last point, it's probably in the words as I crafted them,
Sure.
as I expressed it. Had you been at the meeting, we would have been interested in your thoughts on cumulative. It's not required. I don't do it.
No.
But if we had had a competent hydrogeologist speaking to us, we would have said, hey, Levi, what do you think about this whole cumulative impacts thing? And we would have been interested in your reply. So that was simply an invitation for you to share your hydrogeologic background with us. That was not a character.
I think everybody agrees that, particularly in areas of heavy development, like over in Cheyenne, those areas, they're gonna have to do something. I mean, at some point, cumulative nitrate, is gonna be a problem. There is no basis to do anything with that. I mean, right now, under current rule and regulation, there isn't anything to do with that. There are no other real subdivisions other than Spotted Horse around this thing. I mean, I would have to look farther afield to do some sort of look as to how many subdivisions are out there, but it's not in the aquifer protection area. There isn't much for development out there if you've been out that far south, so I don't know.
That's precisely the feedback that we're interested to hear, and thank you for providing that here in this forum. All right, if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free. I guess my sense is this is going rather like I had expected, in the sense of you understand our concerns, you feel like you've adequately responded to them with respect to the howl, and then now that ball's back in our court. Certainly, we're sympathetic that this larger issue should not be laid at Mr. Howell's lap. Sure. And that's, and that's why we approved the preliminary plat to go forward with that condition. Our intention was not to slow you down, but rather to use that 6 months to have this conversation. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, that didn't happen. But that was our intention in reference to your interests. We were not trying to slow you down. In fact, explicitly, we're not trying to slow you down, and thought we provided the mechanism for that, which then went off the rails for their interests. All right. So sounds to me like you're inviting us to look at your response with some care. I'm not averse to that. But since you are also the consultant on many others of these, or your firm is, I don't know what the status of the Weston is now that Sudori is left. They all have these same kinds of issues. So, and I think that's because you adopted the template that had been developed, and DEQ apparently was satisfied with it. I don't offer that as great criticism, but that we all bring up our last report and we try to repopulate with the new numbers. No.
None of us have ever done that.
So would you like to share with us some thoughts on that larger issue as you go forward with your other clients? Well, we're going to hear the same thing from us.
And we can continue to have a conversation about what you would like to see different. My thing is essentially this template was developed 15 years ago. This template has been through every single DEQ office and has been used in hundreds of subdivision studies. Now, stuff does change in there. We don't always use the perk rate in order to characterize the aquifer. It depends on each geologic situation, as you know well. You have to use each geologic situation to be itself. Now, if we want to have a conversation about things you'd like to see added, I'm always open to having that conversation. I'm not opposed, nor am I arrogant enough to say that my report or Ben's report is pristine, perfect, and should never be changed. Now, also the argument that it's been used for 15 years is not always the best argument.
No,
but
doing something wrong 100 times doesn't make it right.
No, exactly. However, this template has been peer reviewed by lots of people. And We have gotten some feedback on it. We have made some modifications. We have kind of a template that we also use for UIC applications, which is different than this application. So, you know, this is what all of us consultants do in order to be trying cost effective for our client. I mean, we can't recreate the wheel every single time we do something. But I'm always open to a discussion as to what you guys would like to see different. Again, this kind of starts to fall into this weird middle ground of, I also have to make sure I meet DEQ rules and regulations because they're the governing agency, is my understanding of how this works. So, you know, if I can add some more information for you in future subdivision studies that you would like to see after Einspar, I'm open to having a conversation about that. You sent me John's spotted horse thing and I've looked through it, and you know, I think it's great. If we all did more peer review, that'd be marvelous. The unfortunate thing in the geologic community is we don't tend to do a whole lot of peer review unless you're an academic. We all kind of work in a vacuum and we all do our thing, and we all come to a level of you know, what we are comfortable with doing.
And what DEQ has grown accustomed to, well, to sending along, depending on who's the district engineer. But there are much larger issues here. Which we would certainly welcome all of your participation in coming up with something that everyone's satisfied with. That was one of my hopes for this meeting, and I appreciate the attendance of some of our geologic colleagues here for the very purpose. I can share with you that that we have seen. I'm inclined to say use of a perk test to characterize the hydraulic productivity is. I'm skeptical that I can ever be convinced that that's an appropriate thing to do. Maybe there's some geologic environment in which that works. My imagination is a task that I'm having trouble without. And we've certainly seen many cases where we see a perk test in a unsaturated blow sand over a shale limestone aquifer, and the water levels 100 feet down, and it's got no more to do with the honest to goodness horizontal conductivity of the receiving aquifer than the number you got of the foam.
Sure.
Okay, that's
I can understand that.
that's the kind of thing that DEQ may say close enough, or they did their own number, they didn't share it with us, but we have trouble with it.
And likewise, characterizing an aquifer that's 100 feet down that's separated from that waste is also cherry picking numbers too. I mean, which is where, you know, with this particular application, I think we did do what is sufficient. That wastewater is never going to see the aquifer.
And let's get locked into the aquifer. And the fact that so you say there's you know that shale is unfractured, but I invite you to go back and look at these wells that you've brought to our attention that are immediately proximal to this. They got water from somewhere. This guy claims he got 50 gallon minimum. Now,
Yeah, I can go back.
so
I guess if you want to respond to the letter we sent you, so this, like I said, this is kind of how DEQ works. They request something, we send something, they request something, we send something, to the point of where we can all get to some understanding. So if you want to respond to the letter that I sent you, that'd be marvelous. And then I will address, if you want me to go into a detailed discussion of the surrounding wells, I'm happy to do that.
your client might draw the line at some point.
Well, at this point, things are so messed up that it's probably pro bono.
Okay, well, let me turn to my colleague and ask the question of what do we want to do? Is there and Jeff and our lawyer and our planning director, we don't really have a mechanism for that kind of action.
Sure.
So,
go ahead.
May I pose a question to your legal?
Yeah.
Mr. Ayers, can you cite the statutory authority that allows the county to supersede DEQ's recommendation?
The, Mr. Chair, is that question in order?
Yeah, and that was actually getting toward where, kind of where I wanted to go. Because I, as somebody who has been a developer, do not want to see an iterative process that goes on for 3 or 4 months, because as much as I love engineers, I don't like writing checks either. And so what I think we need to see here, first of all, is certainty. What does an applicant need to provide, and what time frame does that need to happen? I personally don't have any issue if some of this data goes out to members of the commission beforehand, so that they can provide written comments back, so that folks can be prepared when we do a preliminary or as the way things will be, a final plat after we get back the chapter 23 study. But I think that in fairness to applicants, they need to be able to have something firm in writing to respond to when an application comes before us. Will that, and to add to that, that's a short-term solution to that issue. The other side of that is, though, we're not going to solve that here. That has to get solved at DEQ. That's the end all, because the fiscal reality of Albany County is we're not going to hire additional staff to do this in the foreseeable future. And the likelihood that we happen to have staff or members of the commission that are qualified to do those kind of things is, it's not temporary, but it's not permanent either. So in our earlier meeting, we were talking about how long Planning and Zoning Commission worked on the APOZ regulations, and it's exactly for this reason. We spent almost 9 months going through everything, trying to think things through before we sent that on to the county commissioners. So short term, it looks to me like it'd be the easiest if there was feedback from the commission individually. This can't be done by groups. And the other thing is, with a lot of the emails that went around over the last couple of weeks, people need to remember BCC, because this is a decision-making body, and we're subject to public records requests and so forth. And so if David sends this out to all of us, so that if we have questions, we can submit them in writing to David to go through, so that they're prepared to answer when we're there, and perhaps provide them in writing, depending on whether it's appropriate or not. But it needs to be a level playing field for everybody, is part of my point.
So, and that's why I'm turning from them to us.
Yeah.
How do we crack this nut? Because the idea that this criteria is way too vague, it's really no different than DEQs. I mean, I think we that are concerned about this are saying we would like these applicants, we insist these applicants bring forward a scientifically credible analysis of impacts to groundwater, which is really no different than what DEQ is requiring. We don't feel DEQ did an adequate job of that review. So where does that leave us? That's my question for the folks sitting at this table. Can we have a verbal discussion with Mr. Hines in this particular case, so with some time limit on it? I don't have an answer here, but what do we, how do we proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Starkey, first up, in response to your request, I will direct you to 185-306C specifically. Little Roman numerals 3, so III, and then also 185-308C. And to clarify, that is not the county superseding DEQ. DEQ provides a recommendation, and that's what that is, a recommendation.
So is one of these the authority for the county to supersede DEQ?
Well, it's, again,
I've read the language and DEQ is a recommendation. It is not a thumbs up, thumbs down. And so the county can act either way. There is no restriction on the county acting either way. That's not saying that Matt won't be busy later because of it, but it is not a controlling factor, I guess. It's to inform the local decision makers.
but it is not wholly binding.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then secondly, just procedurally and to answer your email, yes. Yeah, after, so this has been tabled. This was tabled from November to our December meeting, 14th. That will be it for our procedural time. So I am not definitively saying what I suppose this should be done to resolve this issue in the meantime, but just to give you a clear backboard there. And further, and Ms. Starkey, perhaps this will also address some of your earlier, I suppose, comments. The way this has been noticed, our single agenda item is to discuss environmental quality, chapter 23, reports and applications and reviews. That's that agenda item, which is controlling. So there should not be any directives given or action taken as far as this discussion.
And that
This
was,
particular meeting.
and that was the same for the previous meeting?
That was not.
So the action is okay at the previous meeting?
Yeah, it was a special meeting. Well, they're both special meetings under statute. The difference there was it was an actionable item.
Yeah, well, my understanding is we're proceeding in a cooperative relationship with Mr. Powell and his consultants to try to get this done, Now, if the cooperative agreement, as we sit around the table, qualifies as an action, and we can't take that, put it in holler, but otherwise,
Yeah, it would.
okay, then I'm back to what do we do?
I was looking at staff here and I want to hear from them and then I'll get to
I guess what we would like to see, as staff is maybe if planning and zoning, I mean, obviously not right now or whatever, but in the future, if you guys can come up with, some of the things that you're seeing that we should particularly look at in these reports, so that when we get them, we can kind of go through your checklist and say, hey, these are the areas where we've seen some errors, and these are the types of things, if you see these things, that way, if we get something and we can communicate that before it even gets to you and get some of those things worked out. I mean, that's what we're here for, is we're here to try to get what you want to you without you having to do what we're doing today, and unfortunately, we don't have, expertise in hydrogeology. But you guys do, and I think if you could put it into layman's terms for us to just, and we might not catch everything, but if we can catch a few things, at least we're farther ahead than what we were like in this situation. So that would be a request.
And I was just gonna say, I think a lot of this, it could be addressed. I mean, you're not, to your point, staff can't come up with a list of things that they want to see. It's all in DEQ's chapter 23 as far as a guideline. So I think if we go back, submit the document as early as we can to planning and zoning, and that would probably be at the same time we submit it to DEQ for review. Then this dialogue that we're kind of having here will be one-on-one between the reviewers that are, qualified or feel they're competent, which Byrne and everybody is. I'm saying if you lose Byrne and those guys, but that dialogue will take place. I guess my only concern is, and it's happened to me with folks in DEQ is, they have their own opinions and they're like, we think it is fractured. I can't prove it. You can't prove it, but it is. And so I think that's the point to where it doesn't become an issue. It's just something that the client and us as geologists say, well, planning commission said they didn't feel our theory was adequate. They're the decision makers. We just gotta live with it. But I think a lot of the angst would be diminished if we start the review process a lot earlier.
And you will see that in the subdivision regulations that we will develop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm pleased to see that we've come to similar conclusions there. I'm still left unclear on how we proceed with Mr. Howell.
We cannot proceed with Mr. Howell is the short version of that. This cannot be a decision-making meeting. That is deferred to the 14th. Now,
How might
as,
is the hold another special meeting.
yeah,
Okay, that's all.
and that doesn't do very much for the timeline, and Matt's got something else on plan here in the near future
right.
too. I'm going to suggest that it might be a good thing if some people correspond a little bit on this one-on-one before the meeting on the 14th, so that we could proceed with the application. Because, and Matt mentioned just a moment ago, that the 14th is take action day. So that would just be a suggestion that I have.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So now we're talking specifically about the Howell application. Okay, we have a response from Levi. Is there anything more that we want from him? As involves the Howell application, or is that a satisfactory response? Because it seems to me like it's satisfactory unless you have further concerns.
I can't say, Ms. Stein, Ms. Hanning, have you looked at that with sufficient care to?
Well,
I
think he asked you the direct question on that, so.
My answer is I'm undecided on that. As we sit right here.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
I know. Matt, so if there was one planning and zoning commission person that would like to communicate with me any concerns that they had, and then I pass them on, is that appropriate? If they were so inclined to do so, that'd be appropriate, but that is not a collective decision that can be made by the board at this time.
That's right.
Well, absolutely. Right. So I can communicate as staff with any of the planning and zoning commissions and ask their opinions, can I not? And then come up with my own. There were to be such a collective undertaking, I would say that needs to be properly noticed. If it's, okay. But I can contact one of them and ask their opinion. I don't think that would be outside of any public, that's not a meeting. There's not going to be 3 people as a quorum, right? If they're acting on behalf of the entire body, yes, it would be. Well, how do you determine that? I'll just drop it.
I mean, I guess we're not allowed to take action here. We don't want to screw that up.
And that's just because of the nature of the agenda item as it was noticed.
But I don't want to have to vote no on December 14th because these are unresolved issues. And so I gotta believe that there's some way we could do that. Can I leave it out for beer, or we could assign we can't assign anybody to make that happen to good purpose. Let's figure out what we want to have happen and figure it out. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Minnie.
Mr. Chair, what, Mr. Hinckley, what do you want? What is it that you're looking for before December 14th?
I want to be satisfied that the groundwater quality impacts of the Howell Acres subdivision have been adequately and addressed and in a technically correct manner. And at this point, I do not feel that has happened with Mr. Platt's point. I personally have not digested Mr. Hines' response, and I don't know where my colleagues are, but to answer your question directly, that's what I would like to see between now and December 20th.
Mr. Chair, could I extend that same question to any other commission members? What specifically are any other commission members looking for from Mr. Howell before December 14th?
Jeffrey, do you have any response?
At this time, I don't have a direct response to your question.
Mara? You're still muted, Mara.
Thanks for pointing that out, Mr. Chair. I've been sitting quietly. I really want to first say I appreciate the discussion and everyone's time. And I also appreciate Mr. Chair's comments about that we're trying to look for a level playing field. And I just wanted to point out that I think part of the problem is that's what we're looking for too. And in the bigger scheme of the discussion, I guess what I wanted to just put out there is whether or not we could collaboratively come up with a guidance document or something that we could all hang our hat on prior to anyone submitting a report to DEQ. Like, for example, just right off the top, how people calculate the loading rate based on bedrooms, based on population of a subdivision is variable among the different consultants. Someone might use the county census of 2.25. Another person might come in with 3.75 based on another average that they found cited. So, that right off the bat, that's a pretty big number shift that is coming in differently from different applicants. And, so maybe if the optimism continues here, it has been a very productive conversation. I hope I feel that way. Is there a way for us to agree on a set of parameters that everyone will agree to put into their Werman model or their travel distance, 2-year travel distance, whatever it may be? Can we agree on the parameters going in just as a starting place? Now, as per Howell, I guess here are the questions that I have. Just based on my work experience, anytime someone has said something is a confined aquifer, generally speaking, I've found it to be a semi-confined leaky in places aquifer. So for me to be willing to hang my hat on whether this is truly a confined aquifer, I'd like to know about tritium, if there's any tritium data in the area, right? Because we know that's a for sure mixing is happening situation. And I don't know if that data is available, maybe it isn't. But I guess things like that, concerns about some of our less than perfectly sealed private wells. Is there any potential for anything going down an annular seal of a nearby well? It's just a question these are the things I'm off the top of my head thinking I would want to feel like I'm having satisfied before December 14th. And I'm happy to do some of my own research on this, or I can collaborate one-on-one with the chair to say, these are my concerns, if you intend on writing a letter back to Levi. So thanks.
Mara, I'm just gonna inject something here. I would recommend that correspondence go through staff. That's a lot cleaner than individual correspondence with, especially if it happens to be more than one other member, because I'm not saying, you know, we all know people all over town and we tend to talk business, but when we're working on things like this, I think it's a lot better if we just go through staff.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to go through Mr. Gertsch and pass along concerns to him. Thanks for the suggestion.
Sir.
So that, okay, things emerging out of the fog in my little brain. Individual commissioners can express their concerns and coaching through staff. Those could be communicated to applicants in hopes of them bringing forward a satisfactory document. Is that what we're talking about here? Is that legal? That meet everybody's statutory expertise, whatever applies? It seems odd. Or we have a special meeting and deputize Maura as our representative to the applicant, and they have a work session, or me, or whoever. I'm just looking for options here and what do we need to do to make it happen.
Can I offer something?
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I could just say on behalf of applicants, not just Mr. Howe, but on behalf of applicants, when it's wonderful that you bring this private and professional expertise to the table, but when applicants are posed with having to defend or go beyond the realm of what the commission is designed to do, it brings into serious concern the legal process from an arbitrary and capricious review and standard. And so that's why I asked as a question, what is it that you are looking for Mr. Howe to produce before December 14th to satisfy your inquiries? Because we are willing, notwithstanding our objection that it's legally required, we are willing to do that. But we are not willing to engage in a continuous kind of back and forth deliberation of the fundamentals of the science that you all are talking about. That has to be done at a much different level than beyond an individual application. So I think the conversation is great. And again, the skill and the thoughtfulness that you all bring to the table on this issue is wonderful, but it's one of the reasons, right, why judges aren't allowed to independently investigate anything. It's one of the reasons why judges can't bring their own expertise and independent knowledge on an issue to something. It has to be based on the evidence that's before the board and the rules and the regulations that are governing an analysis of that evidence that are there. That's what creates the level playing field. So at this point, what I'm offering is, on behalf of Mr. Howe, we would like to provide evidence and information that would be helpful for you, but we have to know what that is. And we can't come to a December 14th meeting and say, gosh, we wish you would have addressed this, or this still doesn't meet my individual satisfaction of what the science is. We have to apply with the rules and regulations as they exist now, and we're trying to do that. So, Mr. Ayers, I didn't mean to speak or provide legal advice, of course, on your behalf. I was just saying that from an applicant's perspective, this is where we would be coming from.
That, and I'm sympathetic to that. I don't think we can redesign a process on the backs of this particular application. And so I would suggest, if I'm especially looking at you, Vern, have specific questions that you want to know to get a good answer, I don't see why you and Levi couldn't talk about that. I'd be happy to have you do that. And if you found a problem, let us know what the problem is.
I suspect Mr. Hines would welcome that, but it has to be done to meet other objections. And like I say, I didn't answer it in this guess. it isn't with neither us nor DEQ, is it as simple as saying, I want you to add 2 and 2 and get 4. DEQ's charge is to evaluate the scientific validity of the analysis that's brought to them. So if you were to pose them the same challenge, I want to know exactly what you need me to do. Their answer would be the same as mine. I want you to convince me that you have an acceptable impact. And I don't know that it is, we can't articulate it any more precisely than that. We would like our applicants to bring forward an analysis that we find scientifically credible that addresses our concerns over the impacts to groundwater quality. I don't have a way out of that box unless we simply say whatever DEQ says is fine. Is that the only option that your model would provide us?
Mr. Chair, on behalf of Mr. Howell and applicants, that's why there are codes and regulations, and I don't say that in any sort of mitigating way. There has to be a design framework, and if the statute and the county regulations have said that we defer based on our plenary agreements to DEQ, or we are going to consider DEQ's analysis, that's what you have to do. Again, I'm not trying in any way to offer legal advice to you all. That's certainly Mr. Ayers. But as an applicant, we are charged with complying with what the rules are that are set forth. And if we don't like those rules, we have to change them for the total good, right? Not just for one applicant. And so that's why I keep coming back to Mr. Howell has submitted, as it relates to his application, everything he was required to do under code. And staff have reviewed that recommendation as they are required to do from an analytical perspective and provided the commission a recommendation of adoption. I would argue that applicants are going to be very upset, and it's going to be a very dangerous slope to go down if individual commissioners of any governing body are using private expertise to challenge what the evidence is that's been submitted to the board before it. So that's a much bigger and broader issue. I'm just simply here now today with Mr. Howell saying, what is it that the commission would like to see more of or have answered? Because again, without waiver of our objection, we'll work with Mr. Heim and Mr. Ralph to provide that to you.
Let's posit that this was a bridge design, and we had some bridge expert on the planning and zoning, and they found a calculation that said this bridge is going to collapse, despite the fact that DEQ had missed it. Would we be bound to approve it under your model? That's where I'm having trouble with this. Is that surely if we, for whatever reasons, we were appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission based on the expertise we bring to it to provide our best possible advice to the county commissioners. And we would like to do everything we can to meet that obligation in a responsible way. And included in that obligation is to evaluate the applications that come before us, which is what we're proposing to do.
Please go ahead.
I would say in the hypothetical situation that you brought up, I would say in that particular case, you might have specific definable requests as to soil conditions or something that surrounds your suspicion that the bridge would collapse.
In other words, there has to be specificity with what the issue is. And that was what we came up with at the last regular meeting when we had that had the application in front of us. And so, Matt, what's the way forward? Because I'm not going to wade back into my public meetings mess.
No, I would recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission set a special meeting so that it can be collectively agreed upon exactly and with specificity and in writing what is being looked for and how it is that the applicant may overcome the perceived deficiencies of this commission.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think we owe it to them to say what we're looking for with specificity.
Yes, I would agree, and we cannot decide anything now. So,
And is what we provided them in May insufficient and specific? I mean, that was
I
our attempt to
will
do.
pose that to the applicants.
Sorry, you were asking if what you provided was insufficient? My argument would be, we responded to that. So if there's some sort of deficiency still, I need some sort of documentation as to why my response is deficient according to your comments. I think what the problem is and what Jared had expressed at the last meeting is, where does this end? So I send you back another set of comments, you still are not happy, you send me back another set of comments. We're 9 months down the road, still trying to figure this out. If there's a framework established, which I know there's not at this point, then we all have a goal to shoot at. I mean, we all are on the same field, we all know what we're supposed to do at the end goal, and we can all get there. So I'm happy to send you back another set of comments.
I'm going to insert something else on this discussion. If staff is deemed an application complete, and we see it at a regular meeting, our clock is starting. And we're not free to just drag things out to answer questions. And so go ahead, Vern, and then we need to figure out the next step too.
Right, and I guess why we go back to this is this was our attempt to identify specific parameters with which we were unhappy. We've responded to that and I have not digested your response. But at some point, I'm not sure what additional specificity means. If it isn't, we are unhappy with your selection of a hydraulic conductivity, and we feel that you've not adequately justified your use of that number. That seems as focused as we can provide. Then to the more general point of options, it isn't, we have to approve this at our December meeting because the time has run out. We will be presented with the option of denying this at our December meeting, and we are loath to do that. And then perhaps someone will say you had no basis for that, and we can have that big discussion, but the option available to this group of 5 is denial if we haven't come to conclusions of any of these things. So I think it behooves all of us to try to bring this to some satisfactory conclusion.
Right, which is where if you would respond to what I feel is we addressed appropriately in your comments, then I'm happy to provide you more information before the December meeting.
And this, what we prepared in May was authorized by a decision of this board. So I think it hit the. So I guess I've asked back to you guys, do we need to have a special meeting to authorize us to have this
Matt,
discussion?
are we able to set a special meeting at the when we are in at the special meeting this evening, when we're actually in the decision making? Because although it is that we can make a decision there, but it is not on the agenda.
Correct, since it's not on the agenda, no.
Okay,
The way that you have to follow the statutory procedures, which would be the chair calling such and directing notice.
I will, well, that can't happen at this meeting, can it, or can it?
No, that would be done
Yeah. Yes.
outside.
Well, it's outside of it. I could call a special meeting right now, just like, right? I mean, we don't.
I recommend you wait.
Okay, I don't know, but there isn't any timeline on that. I mean, the special meeting is called at the discretion of the chair. And if that's the sense of the body, I can certainly play my part. And we're not deciding.
We don't even need to have that discussion right now.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Mr. Ayers. If you
Sure.
might help me out. Mr. Harris, we're appointed county P&Z commissioner. And we went through our responsibilities and everything at the start. How does our professional opinion enter into this? Because your colleague there just mentioned a private opinion. And I'm a commissioner, but I'm also a registered geologist. So how does that work?
I think we, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I would need to, I suppose, take a little more time to think about that.
Sure.
Time is permitting, right?
Yeah, I totally get it. I
And
just found myself in this awkward position, which has been pointed out by everybody, that right now the commission has several registered Wyoming, geologists on there with expertise. And it's like, okay, and I'm building off of Commissioner Hinkle's point. He wrote a letter in May. We got a reply an hour before our meeting. Now we're being told that we need to supply a reply to that letter. And then in addition, supply a bunch of other criteria. Prior to the December 16th meeting, and I assume we would do that more than in a couple hours before the meeting. And I'm just not seeing the timeline line up here. And I'm not understanding, I'm bouncing between his point, which is we get something in front of us and the three professionals go, oh gosh, we can't really feel comfortable with this. And we say no. And that leads you into a bad place. But at the same time, if we're supposed to render a professional level opinion, for instance, a list of what we need, that's, I don't know about everybody else, but I got a job. And I don't think I can build a county my time as a consultant to myself as a commissioner. So it's kind of a sticky point here, and I don't see it being resolved by the 12th or the 16th of December meeting.
And Jeffrey, I think the other thing to remember, and it's unfortunate for the commission that it's been almost a full year since we've gone over duties, responsibilities, and I can't even remember, Matt, because I get to go through this with like 3 different groups and really enjoy how different attorneys want to interpret the public records law. So I think part of that is a question that really needs to be almost more in a training session from legal staff about how we evaluate things, how we correspond with each other, or what contact we might have with other members of the commission. It's a lot deeper than just this issue here specifically too. And with that, I think everybody's pretty close to ready to take a break before we start at 6. Kimberly?
I just have a comment and then a question. I'm an outside observer. It appears that there's an impasse here between professional geologists, the ones on this board, and the professional geologists that prepared this report. And not only the professional geologist, but also the professional engineer that stamped the report, who's been a practicing engineer in the state for 30 odd years. It appears to me Mr. Howell has met the obligations of his application, and the county, be it the planning and zoning commission or the county commissioner, have no grounds to deny his application. And this meeting right now seems to be an extra regulatory meeting that really seems unfair, and it's tantamount to harassment of this applicant. And then, of course, Einspar is being thrown around, and that person's not even here. And I think that's really unfair. And so given what I just said. I hope that you will follow your regulations, the county regulations as they are right now, and approve this subdivision application. Because you really have no choice. You have no valid reason to deny. And my question is, of all the applications that have put before this planning and zoning commission, where the planning and zoning commission has challenged the use of the Wyoming model by the consultant, have any firms been challenged outside of Western Engineering? Because it appears that Western Engineering is being specifically targeted, and not only that, in the process, its reputation is being tarnished. So there's my question to you.
Mr. Chair, a short response, just
Certainly.
not to get into a argument with this argument, but I can address a couple of the factual issues that you've raised. And the answer is yes. We see these particular, what we characterize as errors go by, we have flagged them, and it does extend beyond Western Engineering.
And can you tell me which?
I don't need,
I'm just asking a question, and I think transparency is a good thing.
I'm not here to be interrogated either, but let me think about what the name of that particular one, Cottontail, that's why. Okay, I'm not prepared to give you a complete recitation, but no, this is not specific to Western Engineering. It's anybody who comes to us with an application that we feel is technically flawed, be assured we will treat them the same.
All right, well, I'm ready to find the restroom before we leave at 6 o'clock. And so the chair to entertain a motion to adjourn this work session. Or since it's a work session, I guess I can just adjourn it. Meeting's adjourned. We'll see you all at 6. I think we're gonna start up on I believe it's on another Zoom link.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Nope. Okay, I thought you.
What